The school cafeteria was buzzing until it wasn't. Blake Hunter, the football team captain, stood in the middle of the crowd, his hand clenched around Imani Brooks's collar, yanking her backward. 300 students froze like statues, mouths mid-chew, phones slowly lifting to record. But Imani didn't scream. She didn't cry. She wasn't afraid. She looked him straight in the eyes, cold as steel. 3 seconds later, Blake was flat on the cafeteria tiles, gasping, face flushed red with shock and humiliation. No one could believe what had just happened. Not because of how quickly it went down, but because the one who went down wasn't Imani. This wasn't just another cafeteria scuffle. This was the moment everything started to change. Not just for her, but for a school, a community, and a system that had always believed black girls should stay silent. 3 weeks before that cafeteria shaking moment, Imani Brooks walked into her new school, Westvale High. She was a transfer student from Atlanta, and the only black girl in her entire grade. Her mother had said gently as she dropped her off, "Keep your head down for the first few weeks. Things will smooth out." But Imani had never been good at keeping her head down. She walked into her first English class with her curly hair in a high puff, a purple hoodie, and gold earrings that shimmered in the light. The teacher, Ms. Jenkins, smiled and greeted her. "We've got a new student from Atlanta, everyone. Please welcome Imani Brooks." A few curious stares, a few blank looks, then a loud snort from the back. Blake Hunter, tall, broad, in a football jersey, the mayor's son, smirked. "Looks like our school's boosting its diversity stats, huh?" Ms. Jenkins glanced at him but said nothing. Imani knew that look, she knew that tone. And this time, she didn't plan on staying silent. Imani sat in the only empty seat, 3 rows ahead of Blake. She could feel his gaze burning into the back of her neck like a cold shadow. The next morning in chemistry, Imani was paired with a petite Asian girl named Emily Tran. Emily smiled faintly, relieved to find a lab partner she didn't have to pretend around. As they were measuring chemicals, Blake and his crew passed by. He deliberately bumped her arm. A drop of acid spilled onto their lab manual. "Oops," Blake sneered. "Guess people from out of town don't know how to use their hands." The teacher didn't see, but Emily did. And so did more than half the class. Imani didn't shout. She stared him down. "You should be careful. One day you'll fall and won't even know why." Blake raised an eyebrow. Before he could respond, the bell rang. As he walked past, he leaned close to her ear. "You just made a mistake, Brooks." Imani didn't blink. "I don't start trouble. I end it." From that day on, things began to change, for the worse. Imani's locker was stuffed with crumpled paper and dirty masks. Her backpack went missing during PE. Later found in the boys' restroom. Notes were scrawled in messy handwriting. "Go back to the ghetto. No one wants you here." Imani didn't tear them, didn't throw them away. She kept every piece, photographed them, and wrote it all down in a small notebook she carried everywhere. That night, over dinner with her mom, a night shift nurse, Imani simply said, "I'm fine, Mom." But her hands were gripping the edge of the table. Her mom looked her straight in the eye. "Imani, I didn't raise you to lie to me." Imani stayed silent. Not because she didn't want to tell her, but because she knew, when adults stepped in, things usually got worse. She forced a weak smile. "Just new kid stuff. I'm handling it." But handling it was only words to comfort her mother. In truth, every step at school grew heavier by the day. Blake didn't need to lay a finger on her. He had followers. They didn't yell. They whispered, loud enough for her to hear, quiet enough for teachers to miss. "Look at her hair." Her mom probably begged for a free ride. In the hallway, they formed barriers, forcing Imani to twist and wind through like a maze. In class, every time she raised her hand, snickers followed. In the cafeteria, not a single seat stayed empty when she approached. No one hit her, no one slapped her. But the wounds were quieter and deeper. Imani kept writing, kept walking, never bowed her head, but her eyes, they grew heavy. And Emily was the only one still sitting beside her. One sweltering afternoon, as Imani quietly ate at the far edge of the cafeteria, Emily sat down beside her and slid over a carton of milk. "Blake's planning something," Emily whispered, eyes scanning the crowd. Imani raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "What did he say?" "I heard Mason mumble something about teaching her a lesson. I'm not sure, but you should tell someone." Imani took a bite of her sandwich, chewed slowly, then replied as calmly as if they were talking about the weather. "Let him try." Emily leaned closer, her voice even lower. "He's dangerous, Imani. You know that. His dad's the mayor. The school won't do a thing." This time Imani looked her straight in the eyes. "Then I will." She didn't say it with anger. She said it like a decision made long ago, because it was. There was one thing no one at Westvale knew about Imani Brooks. She wasn't just the new girl from Atlanta. She was the daughter of David Brooks, a former Marine who had served 3 tours, now a mixed martial arts coach. Every morning before school, Imani trained with her father. Every night after homework, she kept training. Jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, Krav Maga. No photos, no boasting, no one knew. That part of her was quiet, but sharp as a blade. Before stepping into that day, Imani stood in front of the mirror in her small room, the dim morning light casting soft shadows on her face. She took a deep breath, felt her heart pounding, hands trembling slightly, but she clenched them tight. Her father's voice echoed in her mind like a mantra. Violence is the last resort, baby girl, but if there's no backing down, end it, quick, clean, no hesitation. Imani closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and told herself, I've prepared for this. I won't let fear control me. With steady eyes, she opened the door, ready to face whatever waited outside. Monday morning. The school hallway was the same as always, noisy, indifferent, full of staring eyes. Imani opened her locker. A stack of printed photos fell at her feet. She bent down to pick them up. Not drawings, not notes. They were historical photographs, lynchings of black people, with her face crudely photoshopped onto the victims. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, but fury. This wasn't bullying. This was a hate crime. Imani carefully gathered every photo, didn't tear them, didn't throw them away. She slipped them into an envelope, pulled out her notebook, noted the time, date, number of photos, and location, then walked straight to the principal's office. Her voice was calm, steel-edged. Principal Ward, we need to talk. Principal Ward froze at the sight of the photos spread across her desk. Principal Ward stared at the photos, blinking rapidly as if trying not to look. Her voice softened, trying to sound composed. This is serious, but do you have concrete evidence of who did this? Imani didn't flinch. We both know who's behind it. Principal Ward sighed, avoiding her gaze. Without direct proof, the school can only increase supervision. I'll file a report. Imani folded the photos back into the envelope, her voice low but firm. Keep your report. I have documented everything. If the school won't act, I will. As she walked out, she didn't need to turn around to feel the principal's worried eyes trailing her. Imani no longer expected the system to protect her. She was ready to protect herself. That lunch period, the cafeteria buzzed just like any other day. Imani walked in with her tray, her heartbeat pounding in her chest. She looked around, catching every averted eye, every curled lip. Each time she approached a table, an empty chair would suddenly be taken, or someone would turn their back. The chill spread through her body, but she gripped her tray and steadied herself. She said nothing, sitting quietly at the far end of a table near the trash cans, the only place left unoccupied. Emily arrived a few minutes later and sat silently beside her, tension in her eyes. They're watching, Emily murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Mason Dillon, Blake's whole crew. The cafeteria is weirdly packed today. Imani swallowed, trying to breathe deeply, eyes fixed forward. Her body was tense, her breath short, but she didn't move. Behind her, the scrape of chairs echoed. Blake was approaching, his entire group in tow. No one laughed, no one joked, no one was eating. The air in the cafeteria thickened, heavy, like a storm about to hit. Imani closed her eyes for a moment, exhaled slowly, and prepared to face the greatest test of her life. Blake stopped at the head of the table, looking down at Imani as she ate. His voice rang out loud enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. You're in my seat. Imani didn't look up. Her voice was calm and steady. I don't see your name on it. Blake scoffed, but there was no humor in it. Everything in this school belongs to me, including that chair. Imani chewed slowly, swallowed, then replied, Then you'd better start learning how to lose things. A soft ooh rippled from somewhere. A phone lifted, then another. Everyone could feel it. Something was about to happen. Blake clenched his jaw and stepped closer, casting a shadow that nearly blotted out the light in front of her. I said get up. For the first time, Imani looked up and stared him straight in the eyes. No. One word, one syllable, but it rang out like a starting gun, and then Blake reached out and grabbed her collar. Blake yanked Imani by the collar, pulling her off the chair. Her tray clattered to the floor, food scattering, the sound echoing across the cafeteria. All noise vanished. Imani didn't scream, didn't panic. Her eyes were calm, sharp as steel. Time seemed to slow. She heard Blake's heavy breathing, felt her own heartbeat pounding, but her focus remained unwavering. She sensed the flaws in his stance. Too close, one hand off position, his friends too far to act in time. Imani took a deep breath, laser-focused. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it clockwise hard, sending pain and throwing him off balance. At the same moment, her knee shot up, straight into Blake's gut with full force, a sharp grunt of pain. Before he could recover, she swept his leg out and slammed him to the ground. The impact echoed like thunder. Blake lay sprawled, face pale, stunned beyond belief. Every eye in the room was locked in silent disbelief. Imani stepped forward, planted her foot on his chest. Her voice rang clear and low. "No one touches me, got it?" Not a word of protest, only stunned silence, and the beginning of something powerful. Blake lay gasping on the floor, red-faced from pain and humiliation. He flailed, shouting, "This is assault! She attacked me! Everyone saw it!" Imani's gaze didn't waver. Her voice was steady, sharp as a blade. "Everyone saw you grab me first!" She let go of his wrist and took a step back, hands raised, not in defense, but to show she wasn't afraid. Around them, gasps and murmurs spread. Phones were up, videos were being shared. Students began to speak up. "She was defending herself! I got it all on video!" Emily stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I have footage too. He touched her first." Security guards and staff rushed in, eyes wide at the sight. A security officer called out, "What happened here?" Blake was pale and shaken, pointed at Imani. "She attacked me!" Imani stood calm, answering clearly, "I defended myself, and I have proof." In that moment, the energy in the cafeteria shifted. Everyone realized Imani wasn't just a silent victim anymore. Security Officer Martinez scanned the room, glanced at the crowd, at Blake still on the floor, then at Imani, standing tall, arms relaxed, eyes unwavering. "Did anyone record the whole thing?" he asked loudly. Several hands went up. Emily stepped forward first. "I have it, from the moment he walked up to when Imani defended herself." Martinez took the phone and watched the footage. No skipping, no pausing. His expression shifted, from doubt to certainty. Behind him, Principal Ward entered with 2 teachers. She froze momentarily at the sight of Blake gasping and Imani standing as if nothing had shaken her. Blake yelled when he saw her. "She hit me! That's assault! My dad's going to sue this whole school!" But Principal Ward didn't look at him. She looked at the phone Martinez handed her. Her voice was low but firm. "Blake Hunter, come with me, now." Blake was escorted out of the cafeteria, stammering threats, demanding his father, swearing lawsuits. No one defended him. Imani stayed where she was, neither proud nor afraid, calm, like the eye of a storm. Ms. Jenkins, the English teacher, walked over, her eyes misty. "Are you okay?" Imani nodded slightly. "Better than usual." A few students began clapping, then more, until the entire cafeteria erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped, but enough did to make history at Westvale. For the first time, a black student wasn't isolated for standing up. She was supported. The video spread fast. Within hours, it hit every corner of social media. By that afternoon, a local news outlet ran the headline, "Student attacked in cafeteria, and her response silences the room." Imani never sought fame, but now she could no longer stay hidden. Less than an hour after the incident, Imani's mother, still in her nurse scrubs, arrived at school. The moment she saw her daughter, she pulled her into a tight hug. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Imani whispered, "I'm okay, Mom. I did exactly what Dad taught me." In a makeshift meeting room, Principal Ward, the district's lawyer, and a civil rights representative sat around a table. This time there were no empty promises. For the first time, they listened. Imani presented everything, her notes, photos, testimony from Emily, and other students. The lawyer flipped through the thick folder and nodded slowly. This young lady didn't just act within her rights. She prepared better than the school board. Principal Ward murmured, almost confessing, "We knew, but we didn't act fast enough." Imani didn't lash out. She said only one thing. Silence is also a choice. And from that moment on, those who had turned away were forced to choose again. By the end of that day, the video had over 400,000 views. Comments poured in, "This girl is a hero. That's not violence, that's self-defense. My daughter needs to learn from her." The story spread, from local TV to national networks. Imani Brooks' name was no longer just known in Westvale. It was known across the country. That evening when she got home, she checked her phone. Hundreds of messages from strangers, students from New York, Texas, California, SMs, all sending thanks. One boy wrote, "I got bullied because of my dark skin, but you showed me I don't have to take it." Imani put the phone down. Not because she was tired, but because she realized what she did wasn't just personal anymore. It had touched something far bigger than herself. The next morning, when Imani walked into the cafeteria, the energy had shifted. The stares weren't cold or hostile anymore. They were curious, maybe even admiring. A newly transferred boy stood quietly in a corner, eyes filled with quiet respect. A girl leaned over and whispered to her friend, "Did you see that? I used to be bullied too. Thanks to Imani, I know I'm not alone." Emily smiled as she looked around. "The movement's starting to spread," she said. In class, whispers filled the English room, retelling Imani's story. A note was left on her desk. One word: warrior. Another student leaned over and whispered, "She showed me how not to break." The small circle around Imani kept growing. She was no longer alone, and that gave her the strength to keep walking her chosen path. At lunch, while Imani and Emily were eating, a familiar shadow approached. Mason, Blake's right hand, stopped at their table. Both girls tensed. But Mason didn't look smug. His arms hung by his sides, his eyes uncertain. "I'm not here to start anything," he said softly. "I just want to say sorry." Imani put her spoon down and looked at him. "For what?" Mason swallowed. "For everything. For not speaking up, for laughing, for staying quiet even when I knew Blake was wrong." Imani stayed silent, then asked, "Why now?" Mason exhaled and looked down. "Because when I saw him lying there, and you still standing, I realized he was never strong. I was just following." He didn't wait for forgiveness. He turned and walked away. Emily leaned in and whispered, "You woke him up." Imani shook her head. "It's not because I'm strong. It's because I'm no longer afraid." 3 days after the incident, Blake was officially suspended. His father, Mayor Hunter, arrived at the school in a black Mercedes wearing sunglasses, followed by his private lawyer. The media was already waiting outside. Cameras pointed directly at the entrance. Meanwhile, Imani had been called to submit additional statements. She walked down the administration hallway, lined with eyes. She wasn't the invisible girl anymore. Nor was she just the girl who got applause. She was now a focal point, a force around which old values were shaking. By afternoon, the school district issued a statement. "An internal investigation has confirmed an assault on a student. The school is working with legal counsel and may pursue criminal charges." Blake had once been untouchable, but now the football jersey was no longer a shield. Imani didn't tear the system down. She made it collapse, because it no longer had anywhere to hide. The next day, something unexpected happened. 3 students, 1 boy, 2 girls, came forward to Principal Ward and the counseling office. All of them had one thing in common. They had been victims of Blake Hunter. Bullied, threatened, humiliated for months, but never spoke up, until they saw Imani stand. One of them, named Olivia, even brought a notebook. "I used to document everything too, but I thought no one would care." This time they weren't afraid anymore. Imani didn't know them, but they knew her. In the council room, Principal Ward sat silent, reading their statements. She saw not only Blake's wrongdoing, but the way her own system had enabled it through silence. And with one act of resistance, Imani had broken a long-standing culture of fear. News of the 3 students speaking up spread fast, creating a ripple across the school. Within 24 hours, a spontaneous group chat was formed under the name Westvale United Against Bullying. It started with a few dozen students from different classes. By the end of the day, the number had passed 200, of all races, all grades, including students Imani had never even met. Emotional messages began to pour in, stories of bullying, years of silent suffering, and new hopes for change. Emily watched the screen as the member count rose by the minute. She whispered to Imani, "See this? It's not just a group, it's a community waking up." Imani nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. They're not just listening anymore. They're starting to believe they're not alone. It was a turning point, a movement born not from a campaign, but from one act of courage. Around school, eyes no longer focused solely on Imani. They turned toward Blake's old crew. Mason Dillon and a few of the football players who once orbited Blake's power now found themselves whispered about. One day, Imani saw Dillon sitting alone on a bench, head low. No one joined him. No one spoke to him. Emily sighed beside her. They're tasting a bit of what they once served. But Imani didn't gloat. She simply watched. In class, some teachers began to shift. No more brushing things off. No more laughing off harmless jokes. Ms. Jenkins even paused a lesson to say, "From now on, no insult in this classroom will be excused as a joke again." No applause followed. but a few nods did. The old system hadn't fallen yet, but cracks were spreading across its walls. Imani had never wanted to be famous, but in just 1 week her name was on blogs, school podcasts, reaction videos, even the evening news. A journalist from Atlanta called her mom. "We'd love to interview Imani. She's a symbol of courage." Imani declined. She didn't want to be a slogan. She just wanted peace. Lunch with Emily, schoolwork, training with her dad. But peace was no longer an option. Some students looked at her with admiration. Others with jealousy, even hate. An anonymous message was sent to the school inbox. "Just because you took down one guy doesn't mean you're queen now." Emily watched as Imani quietly deleted the message. "You okay?" Emily asked. Imani answered softly, eyes on the window. "I'm okay, but this time, I'm not looking away." Because once you stand up, silence is no longer a choice. That weekend, Imani's father, David Brooks, drove through the night from Atlanta to Westvale. He didn't ask questions, he just opened the door and hugged his daughter tight. "I've heard," he said. "I just needed to see you in the flesh, and know you're still standing." They sat in the living room, no lights, just porch lights spilling through the window. David opened his bag, pulled out an old pair of training gloves, and placed them on the table. "You didn't just use technique, you used the right spirit." Imani was quiet, holding one glove, brushing the worn leather. "Dad," she said softly, "I didn't expect it to get this big." He nodded, serious. "Because when someone stands up, the world pays attention." Then he squeezed her hand. "But you don't have to be a hero. You just have to keep being you, and that's what makes you strong." Imani nodded, because she knew every battle outside began with a belief rooted deep inside. Monday morning, history class welcomed a special guest, a representative from the NAACP invited by the school. Principal Ward opened the discussion. "Today we won't learn from books, we'll learn from each other." Imani sat quietly in the back. She didn't want to be the focus, but eyes drifted toward her anyway. The representative asked, "How many of you have seen bullying and stayed silent?" Nearly half the class raised their hands, slowly, reluctantly. "How many have been victims and thought no one would believe you?" Even more hands went up. No one looked directly at Imani, but everyone was looking into themselves. After the session, a student approached her quietly. "I used to stay quiet, but you made me want to change that." Imani didn't say a word, she just nodded. Because sometimes change doesn't start with speeches. It starts when others are brave enough to face their own fear. As part of the school changed, the other part resisted. Some students whispered behind her back, "Now you can't say anything to anyone. Everything's called racism." Imani acts like she's the only victim in the world. A small group, Blake's old friends, began spreading rumors that Imani set him up, that she provoked him to get attention. Some even filmed her in the hallways, editing clips into memes. Emily fumed. "They know you were right, but they still need something to hold on to, so they don't feel guilty." Imani just exhaled. "They're not fighting me. They're fighting the discomfort of having to change." That afternoon, she stood in front of the mirror, unpinned her bun, and let her hair fall naturally, knowing full well she'd hear whispers tomorrow. But she smiled, because if silence once fed the bullies, then now her very presence was defiance, without a word. In art class, a sophomore named Sanaa Ellis was finishing her final project, a portrait. The subject wasn't a stranger, it was Imani. Her textured hair, unwavering eyes, and at the bottom, painted in black ink, "No one touches me unless I allow it." After class, Sanaa placed the painting in front of the library doors. No announcement, just left it there. Hours later, students stopped to look, then took pictures, then shared it. Ms. Jenkins saw it and asked, "Did you paint this?" Sanaa nodded. "I never dared speak up before, but because of Imani, now I know I can." That afternoon, Imani passed by and stopped. She saw herself, not in the image, but in the impact. Emily stood beside her and said quietly, "You're lighting fires in people you've never even spoken to." Imani replied softly, "Because when I stood up, I didn't stand alone anymore." The following week, Principal Ward's office sent an invitation to Imani's family for a special meeting, not for discipline, but to discuss a school-wide reform plan. In that room sat Principal Ward, a district representative, a civil rights attorney, Imani's father, David Brooks. The topic, building student protection programs and anti-bullying policy reform. Imani was invited to share her story and suggestions. She spoke with calm but unshakable conviction. We can't only rely on rules to punish. We need to create an environment where every student feels safe to speak up." The room fell quiet for a long moment. Principal Ward nodded, eyes firm. "We're not just correcting the past, we're building a better future." Several student representatives nodded silently in agreement. Imani knew this wasn't her story anymore. It was the beginning of a much longer journey toward justice and dignity. After the meeting, something unprecedented was announced. Westvale High would officially establish a student committee against bullying and discrimination. And the biggest surprise, Mason, once Blake's loyal follower, would co-lead it with Emily Tran. At the first meeting, Mason stood up, looking at familiar faces. Friends, classmates, and those he once ignored. "I used to side with silence, but I saw what silence creates, and I don't want to be part of it anymore." Imani sat at the end of the table. No speech and any leadership, just listening. Emily looked over and smiled. "You don't have to do everything. You lit the fire, now we'll keep it burning." And for the first time since it all began, Imani truly exhaled. Because the weight no longer sat on her shoulders alone. It had become a collective force. A week later, the school board released an official statement. Blake Hunter was permanently expelled, not temporarily suspended, not voluntarily transferred, expelled for a pattern of violent behavior. His father, Mayor Hunter, immediately held a press conference. His lawyer stood beside him, throwing out phrases like family reputation and excessive response by the victim and media defamation. But no one was listening anymore. The videos, the testimonies, the student movement, the truth was undeniable. A veteran teacher whispered to Ms. Jenkins in the staff lounge, "For the first time in 15 years, the name Hunter doesn't work as a shield." Imani didn't appear in the press, didn't rebut, didn't need to speak. Because she understood. Truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to stand its ground. And for the first time, the system chose what was right over what was powerful. With Blake gone, the air at school felt lighter, but not completely easy to breathe. The hallways had fewer sneers, but more cold, silent stares that seemed to say, "Don't think you've won." Some students whispered about overreaction, too far, and "you can't say anything without being called a bigot now." When Emily heard such talk in the bathroom, she spoke up plainly. "No one's stopping you from speaking. You're just finally being held accountable for what you say." Imani walked those same hallways, needing no rebuttals. Her presence was enough. Same natural hair, same calm gaze, same upright stance. One day, someone slipped a handwritten note on her locker. "I'm not as brave as you, but because of you, I'm learning to be." She folded it and placed it in her notebook, alongside every threat, apology, and silent thank you, because she knew victory isn't when the bad disappear. It's when the good stop being afraid. On her last day at Westvale High, Imani sat in the back seat of her dad's car. She looked out the window at the hallways, the cafeteria, the football field. Once battlegrounds, now places where she had found her strength, resilience, and unyielding will. She smiled quietly to herself and whispered, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." Beside her, her father looked on with quiet pride, and she knew, whatever comes next, no one would ever grab her by the collar again. Because she wasn't just someone who stood up. She was someone who made the world look up. At Howard University, Imani was no longer the lonely girl among hostile stares. She was surrounded by like-minded peers, black students, activists, people who had fought their own battles. Her African American Studies class wasn't just academic, it was a continuation of the struggle. One day, when Professor Davis asked students to share personal experiences, Imani quietly told the story of Westvale. She didn't say much, but every word drew silence across the room. She didn't want to be remembered only as the girl who fought bullying. She wanted to be someone who inspired future generations. At Howard, Imani joined the martial arts club, attended protests, and found her voice, a voice full of power and hope. Back at Westvale High, a new school year brought a new face into the spotlight. Sana Ellis, a sophomore artist with beautifully styled natural hair. She had endured teasing and discrimination, especially from teachers and peers who didn't understand her. One day in art class, when Brett Morrison made a derogatory comment about her heritage, Sana stood up, cool and firm. "Enough, Brett. Stop right now." She pulled out her phone and began recording. This time, the teacher didn't ignore it. Sana's bold stand was quickly shared across campus. At her dorm in Howard, Imani saw the video and smiled. She knew the fire had been passed on, and the fight for justice was burning stronger than ever. The video of Sana spread quickly, gaining attention not only in school but across the region. Her story became a symbol of self-defense, not just physical, but mental resilience and courageous speech. Sana continued to be mentored by Imani and Emily, learning both self-defense techniques and how to handle emotional pressure. At one training session after school, Imani told the group, "Victory doesn't always mean defeating your opponent. Sometimes it just means not letting them defeat you." Emily nodded in agreement. "We fight by standing tall and by standing together." That small group grew into a strong network, not just practicing martial arts, but spreading awareness about self-protection and unity. At Howard, Imani wasn't just training, she was organizing. She and her friends hosted workshops on anti-racism, student rights, and self-defense. One evening, her phone buzzed. Emily's voice came through, worried. "Sanaa's in trouble. Brett Morrison is suing her for filming without permission. They've hired the same type of lawyer Blake had." Imani said, steady but determined, "Send me her number. We'll help her get through this." She connected them with lawyers from the NAACP and shared her own experience. Imani knew the battle wasn't just about fists. It was legal, emotional, ongoing, and she was ready to fight, not just for herself, but for those who came after. In the following weeks, Imani and Emily, with legal support, helped Sanaa prepare for the lawsuit. They held support meetings, offered legal education, and shared emotional strategies. Sana felt the strength of a community standing behind her. In one live stream, Sana spoke tearfully. "Thank you to Imani, Emily, and everyone who helped me learn to stand up for myself. And to never feel alone." Imani's actions had changed more than just one school. They had created a lasting support network. Her story inspired others to rise, to speak, and to fight for themselves. At Westvale's MLK Day celebration, Imani was invited as the keynote speaker. She stepped onto the stage and looked out at the crowd, diverse in age and color, all listening. She began with a quote from James Baldwin. "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." She shared her journey from a bullied girl to a symbol of strength and justice, and she emphasized, "We don't stand up to defeat enemies, we stand up to build a community where everyone is respected." Thunderous applause followed. Some wept. This wasn't just a speech, it was a call to action, and a promise never to go back to silence. After the speech, Imani returned to Westvale High, for the first time in months. She walked the halls that had once been battlefields, but now the atmosphere had changed. Banners reading "Respect and Inclusion" hung from the walls. Teachers wore badges reading "Anti-Racism Ally." Several students approached her, smiling, shaking her hand, offering quiet thank yous. Principal Ward welcomed her into her office, eyes full of hope. "You've inspired a new generation." Imani smiled back and replied, "The story isn't over. It's just beginning." And she knew she wasn't returning to the past. She had come to help light the future. Numbers don't lie. The school's report showed bullying reports dropped by 60%. Over 200 students had enrolled in after-school self-defense classes. The student council organized awareness campaigns on diversity and respect. Principal Ward shared, "Not everything is perfect, but we're headed in the right direction." Imani looked at the numbers quietly. She knew many challenges remained, but every small step had made a difference. The school was no longer a place she simply wanted to survive. It was a place she wanted to help build. She smiled, filled with hope. It only takes one person to stand up, and everything can begin to change. In class, Professor Davis encouraged students to share personal experiences with justice and resistance. When it was Imani's turn, she told her Westvale story with simplicity. She didn't focus on recognition or success, just the core lesson. Courage is in the absence of fear. It's choosing to act in spite of it. Her classmates listened closely. Zara, a student from Detroit, nodded. "I once led a protest at my school, but your story made me realize I'm not alone." Imani smiled as she looked around the room, knowing her fight had touched many hearts. She said softly, "We don't just stand for ourselves, we stand for each other." After class, students came up to Imani to share their own stories. Some spoke of loneliness from bullying, others of the helplessness they felt in the face of discrimination. Imani didn't just listen. She shared how she overcame through resilience and the support of her community. One student asked, "How do you find the courage when fear feels too big?" Imani replied, "Courage doesn't mean no fear. It means walking forward, even when fear follows you." Her words were quoted in the campus paper and quickly spread. Many called it a compass for those still lost in the dark. And for Imani, it was living proof of the power of sharing and solidarity. One afternoon, as Imani was leaving her dorm, a young teacher named Miss Kelly approached her. She was emotional. "I was a student teacher at Westvale the year you were a senior," she said. Watching you stand up changed how I see teaching." Miss Kelly fought back tears. "I promise I'll never turn a blind eye to bullying in my classroom. Thank you for showing me what courage really is." Imani simply smiled. She knew her strength wasn't just in how she had resisted, but in how she had inspired others to resist. And it was people like Miss Kelly who would make change last. Imani's return to Westvale wasn't just a visit. Other schools and districts began asking about her story. They called, wrote letters, and asked how to create safer environments. Principal Ward proudly said, "We tell other schools this. Big change starts with one person who refuses to bow." Imani heard this from Emily over the phone. She smiled gently. "We started a movement, not a moment." And she knew, though the road ahead was still long, the power of one voice could reshape the world. One day, a student named Deshaun Williams shared the Westvale video on social media. Deshaun was a young black man who had also been bullied at his own school. He used self-defense techniques he learned from Imani's videos to protect a Latina student who was being threatened. His action went viral and was praised by multiple news outlets. Deshaun said in an interview, "Imani showed me that you don't have to become the attacker to protect yourself or someone else." Imani, watching the video, was deeply moved. She realized her story hadn't just changed one school, it had inspired thousands across the country. Spring arrived, and Imani received an invitation to speak at a national conference on school safety and anti-bullying. Before hundreds of teachers, administrators, and policymakers, she spoke, "We can't just talk about change. We have to live it every day. Let's create environments where every student is heard, protected, and respected. Not with silence, but with action and courage." The applause was thunderous. Her speech wasn't just remembered, it became a guide for new educational policies. And Imani knew her journey wasn't over, but she wasn't walking it alone. Time passed, and Westvale's self-defense program expanded, gaining funding and support from several organizations. Imani continued to work behind the scenes, teaching classes, sharing her story, and mentoring new students. Emily, now one of the program's leaders, said, "We're not just learning to protect our bodies, we're learning to protect our voices and our dignity." Under the gym lights, students from all backgrounds trained together, laughing and building bonds. Imani stood quietly, thinking, "This fire will never die, not just in me but in the community." And she knew. As long as someone stood up, the fire for justice would never be extinguished. The journey of Imani Brooks isn't just the story of one girl who stood against bullying. It's proof of the power of courage, resilience, and an unbreakable will. She turned victimhood into empowerment, sparking change from one individual to an entire community. But the fight against injustice never truly ends. Any one of us can be our own version of Imani. Have you ever stayed silent or dared to stand up? Share your story below. And if this one made you feel stronger, don't hesitate to share it with someone who might need it. Because change starts with one and grows into a movement. Are you ready to rise?